The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet, it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. Atlantis. For centuries, scholars have argued over the existence of an advanced civilization with vast technological, scientific, and spiritual knowledge. Much of the earliest public information in recorded history comes from the Athenian philosopher Plato, whose famous works, the Critias and the Timaeus, include accounts of this ancient and advanced society. According to Plato, Atlantis was a massive island in the Atlantic Ocean, said to be the creation of the Greek god Poseidon. In the Critias, the philosopher wrote about the values of the Atlantean society. They despised everything but virtue, caring little for their present state of life and thinking lightly of the possession of gold and other property, which seemed only a burden to them. Neither were they intoxicated by luxury, nor did wealth deprive them of their self-control, but they were sober and saw clearly that all these goods are increased by virtue and friendship with one another. The Greek god of the sea is said to have appointed 10 kings when creating order in Atlantis, each with his own division and within his own city. These kings had absolute control over citizens and laws alike, punishing and even killing as the monarch chose. Some believe it is the cradle of primordial tradition, which flows through Rosicrucian tradition. Legend tells us the first king of Egypt was chosen among the Atlanteans, and later Thutmose III, in addition to serving as pharaoh, together with his co-pharaoh Hatshepsut, organized the mystery schools together as a single order.
Thutmose III was a very controlling and organizing individual. One of the things he was very interested in was the already operating classes concerning mysticism, looking into the mysteries of life. And he organized them from disparate groups to one solid class. He did not interfere with the thinking of the generality of the Egyptian people who worship many gods.
The incredible detail is often chalked up to the imagination by those uninterested in the esoteric mysteries of the ancient past. Yet, Plato is practical in his description and even goes so far as to describe the Atlantean landscape, architecture, and infrastructure, pointing out their advanced use of water, stating, "In the next place, they had fountains, one of cold and another of hot water in gracious plenty flowing, and they were wonderfully adapted for use by reason of the pleasantness and excellence of their waters. They constructed buildings about them and planted suitable trees. Also they made cisterns, some open to the heavens, others roofed over, to be used in winter as warm baths. There were the royal baths and the baths of private persons, which were kept apart. And there were separate baths for women and for horses and cattle, and to each of them they gave as much adornment as was suitable." According to Plato, his knowledge was derived from the work of Solon, who lived in the 7th and 6th centuries BCE. The accounts don't end with Plato, however, with references by Herodotus, Plutarch, Proclus, and several other Greek thinkers of similar era. Atlantis flourished for millennia until it declined due to corruption, warmongering, superstition, and finally ending in cataclysm. In the 1600s, it was Sir Francis Bacon, a scientific and philosophical pioneer at the time and leader to the Rosicrucians, who used the idea of an ideal civilization in his utopian work, The New Atlantis. Even today, there is a great desire by the greater collective consciousness to find the lost underwater civilization known as Atlantis, Various nuggets of truth about it have been the subject of countless comic books, novels, movies, and television shows. The legend persists, and their ancient knowledge and high ideals continue to be passed down through esoteric tradition. But what the mainstream doesn't acknowledge is the fate of the sacred knowledge which was nearly lost when Atlantis was destroyed. There are several theories ranging from a great flood to volcanoes and even misuse of highly advanced technology. But could the survivors of Atlantis have passed their wisdom onto another society? Although a consensus of researchers places Rosicrucian historical beginnings in the 17th century, we are of the opinion that the genesis of this movement dates from much further back. Such was the belief of German alchemist Michael Meyer. In his work, Silentium Post Clamoris, he described Rosicrucianism as having arisen from the Egyptians, the Brahmins, the mysteries of Eleusis and Samothrace, and the Magi of Persia, the Pythagoreans, and the Arabs. Its mystery schools, which acted both as universities and monasteries, were the guardians of its wisdom. These schools experienced a distinctive flowering under the rule of Akhenaten, especially after he introduced the concept of monotheism. The Egyptian religion is particularly intriguing because of its mystery schools. The figure of Hermes Trismegistus had some of his origins in Egypt in the god Thoth, together with the Greek god Hermes. According to Christian Rebbe, in the Egyptian pantheon, Thoth enjoyed a special illustriousness. He was shown as an ibis-headed man or as a baboon. Equipped with a palette, reed, and papyrus, he was always ready to transcribe the word of Ra. He was the very epitome of a scribe. He was described as the inventor of hieroglyphs. Thoth was the protector of scribes, the teacher of medicine, astronomy, and the arts. He knew the secrets of magic. He was the initiator. In the New Kingdom, under Akhenaten, the ancient pantheon was abolished and the cult of Aten was instituted. Even so, Thoth preserved certain prerogatives during the pharaoh's reign. After the disappearance of the founder of Egyptian monotheism, Thoth regained his recognition as all-knowing sage and the teacher of secrets. During this period, writings of an occult character became important. Harvey Spencer Lewis, a noted Rosicrucian author, mystic, founder in the USA, and first imperator of the ancient and mystical order Rosicrucians. Regarded Tutmosis III, the pharaoh who introduced this period, as the organizer of the school of initiates that later gave rise to the Rose Cross. The occult knowledge of the Egyptians was considered secret. It was transmitted by houses of life, sometimes called mystery schools, which were attached to each temple. It was well documented between Herodotus and Plato that the Greek traditions owed much to Egyptian priests. Both men had visited Egypt and learned of many similarities in their pantheons. There existed a strong tradition which claimed the great sages of ancient Greece obtained their knowledge from the Egyptian teachers. It was claimed that many among them were initiated into the mysteries, thus assuring the transmission of Egyptian learning into the Greek world. During the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt and into the early Common Era, the teachings of the Egyptian mystery schools began to emerge in a Hellenized form that we have received as the Corpus Hermeticum, probably written down by the 2nd century CE and attributed to the syncretistic figure Hermes Trismegistus. In addition to inspiring a great deal of philosophical and mystical thought, the Corpus Hermeticum was adopted as a holy book by the Sabians of Haran. We have our first copies of the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, a text which assumed an important place in the Hermetic and alchemical tradition in the 6th or 7th century in Arabic. It was found in a work that is attributed to Apollonius of Tyana, a philosopher and thaumaturge of the 1st century CE. In this book, Apollonius relates how he discovered the tomb of Hermes. He claims to have found in a sepulchre an old man seated on a throne holding an emerald-colored tablet upon which appeared the text of the famed Emerald Tablet. Before him was a book of secrets explaining the secrets of creation of beings and the knowledge of the causes for all things. Around the 9th century, Ibn Washia, in a treatise entitled The Knowledge of the Occult Unveiled, presented many occult alphabets attributed to Hermes. He also made reference to the 4 classes of Egyptian priests descended from Hermes, including one class from the sister of Hermes Trismegistus. Magic also occupied a central position in Arab life. Islam made use of magical letters, much like the Hebrew Kabbalah, for penetrating the Quran's secrets.
Moreover, Arab magic, which Christian Rosenkreutz informed us much later, was quite varied and encompassed a wide range: astrology, medicine, talismans, etc. Astrology was ever present in the Islamic world.
The heritage of Hermes Trismegistus is manifold. Its treasures, alchemy, magic, and astrology constitute essential elements of traditional esotericism and have traversed many civilizations. Nonetheless, the latter have always considered Egypt to be the mother of all traditions. In the Middle Ages, the ancient heritage penetrated the West,
And by the time of the Italian Renaissance, it took on a new aspect in constituting what is generally called Western esotericism. It then developed in a special way so as to reach a critical threshold on the brink of the publication of the Rosicrucian manifestos.
The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. Though any forensic evidence is difficult to contextualize, assuming the inheritance of Atlantean knowledge by the Egyptians, it becomes easier to track the historical transmission of information as the amalgamation of Egyptian and Greek influence, which persists in several important mystery schools that later emerged, and have contributed to what we know today as the Rosicrucian Order. In 1929, H. Spencer Lewis, first imperator of the Rosicrucian Order Amorc, wrote a remarkable description of the Essenes as part of his book, The Mystical Life of Jesus, 18 years before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Lewis's work was one of the inspirations of the modern Essene movement. In order to understand the relevance and context of the Dead Sea Scrolls, we must revisit the mystical Essene tradition. It is important to note that even Jesus himself is believed by many to have been a member of the Essenes. The principal sources on the Essenes include Philo and Josephus. They are also mentioned by the ancient writers Pliny the Elder, Silenus, Porphyry, Eusebius, and Epiphanius. Although the direct Hebrew or Aramaic equivalent of Essene has not been found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient and modern authors have consistently used the Greek name to refer to this group with varying explanations for its etymology. Ancient literature regarding the Essenes is fairly abundant. Where the Essenes came from is unknown, and the meaning of the word Essene is a mystery. There is no Hebrew word for these people, only the Greek. According to the Jewish philosopher Philo of Alexandria, in his work, Every Virtuous Person is Free, they were above all things worshippers of God. They refrained from the ritual animal sacrifice that was common among the popular religious tradition at that time, instead endeavoring to make their own minds fit for holy offering. They lived in villages, far from major cities, and shared all resources equally with members of the community, including provisions and treasury. Interestingly enough, they shared many similar practices with the Pythagoreans. Among the different groups of Essenes were the Therapeutai near Alexandria, whom Philo described as specializing in healing arts. Health of body, soul, and spirit always figures prominently in the Rosicrucian tradition and its antecedents. 2 millennia passed from the time the scrolls were written until they were discovered in 1947. But what exactly are the Dead Sea Scrolls? The artifacts themselves are documents written with a carbon-based ink, usually on animal skins, although some are inscribed on papyrus. The Hebrew and Aramaic text were written, as they are today, from right to left. As was common with many ancient languages, there are no periods, commas, quotation marks, or any other punctuation, except for an occasional paragraph indentation. In some cases, there aren't even spaces between the words. The letters simply run together in a continuous stream. They are the most significant and oldest manuscripts that give historical authority to biblical texts and to the history of their time. As the story goes, in 1947, young Bedouin shepherds searching for a stray goat in the Judean desert entered a long untouched cave and found jars filled with ancient scrolls. That initial discovery by the Bedouins yielded 7 scrolls and began a search that lasted nearly a decade and eventually produced thousands of scroll fragments from 11 caves. During those same years, archaeologists searching for a habitation close to the caves that might help identify the people who deposited the scrolls excavated the Qumran Ruins, a complex of structures located on a barren terrace between the cliffs where the caves are found and the Dead Sea. The importance of the Essenes and their creation of the Dead Sea Scrolls is fairly clear, because the scrolls contain well over 800 separate documents recording biblical history, and because the amazing inhabitants of Khirbet Qumran created the scrolls before 100 CE. Tomes have been written about the scrolls and their Essene connection, coming from the late Second Temple period, a time when Jesus of Nazareth lived. They are older than any other surviving manuscripts of Hebrew scriptures by almost 1,000 years. But the Essenes were not the only esoteric school of thought to emerge at that time. The Greek religion was still a prominent influence, and though many of the pantheon's deities had begun to merge and find congruency with the deities of Egypt, there was a figure that emerged who had been a beacon of light since the 6th century before our era. Some of the early Christians regarded the Greek figure Orpheus as kind of a pagan saint, even confusing his image with that of Jesus. Both saviors appeared to be demigods of royal descent, who sought to refashion an existing religion in the interests of humanitarianism. Orpheus and Jesus both descended into Hades to rescue innocents confined there. Some mystical texts describe Orpheus as a real initiate who spent 20 years in Egypt and was a member of the mystery school associated with Memphis. Most people can recall 2 things about Orpheus: that he was a musician and that he went down into the underworld to fetch his wife Eurydice. His story is the archetypal myth of the power of music. With the lyre that was a gift from Apollo, Orpheus could move the hearts of everything in creation, from stones, trees, and beasts, through humans to supernatural and even divine beings. His music was even said to move inanimate objects, and his sacred songs reveal the greatest secrets of the universe. Orpheus was also said to be a well-respected theologian who told the origins of the universe and the deities through hymns and music. Along with Homer, Hesiod, and Pindar, he was venerated as the greatest of Greek poets. As a theologian, he was said to have been initiated into the mystery schools of ancient Egypt and brought these sacred traditions to Greece. Orpheus was definitely an important mythical figure, and an entire mystery school grew around his traditions, which included the figure of Dionysus, emphasizing each person's spark of divinity. This meant that the initiate no longer had to fear death, for the transition only meant a reunification with the whole divine self. One of the most revolutionary innovations developed by the Orphic scholars was their understanding that the Greek myths about the gods and goddesses should not be taken literally, but interpreted symbolically and mystically. Sometime during the later half of the 5th century BCE, an unknown Orphic philosopher and theologian wrote a substantial commentary on one of the Orphic theogonies, which described in mythological terms the evolution of the cosmos from an original unity to the great multiplicity we experience, and the commentary went to great lengths to discuss interpretations of the text. This was surprising for modern scholars to learn, since this kind of learned interpretive commentary was thought to have originated later in the academies of Athens and Alexandria, as Neoplatonism arose in the 3rd century CE. Though celebrations of Orpheus faded over time, he and his story returned during the period of the Italian Renaissance. Philosophers, poets, musicians, and intellectuals resurrected many of the traditions of ancient Greece. This period of intellectual and artistic rebirth was further enriched by the many ancient texts that resurfaced after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. The rediscovery of classic sources was spearheaded by Cosimo de' Medici, a 15th century Florentine ruler who sponsored the translation of a great number of classical works of antiquity from Greek into Latin, thus making a number of original sources available to the West for the first time in over 1,000 years. We know that Marsilio Ficino shared a deep affinity with Orpheus and shared many of his attributes. He sang the Orphic hymns, played an Orphic lyre with an image of Orpheus painted on it, was eloquently compared to Orpheus by those who knew him, and practiced what we would now call music therapy as a method for psychological healing and spiritual integration. After Ficino, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola also rediscovered the magical and theurgic use of Orphic hymns, saying, "Nothing is more effective in natural magic than the hymns of Orpheus, if the correct music, the intent of the soul, and other circumstances known to the wise were to be applied." The myth of Orpheus resonates over time as a powerful archetype because it demonstrates how art, poetry, and music can be used to bridge multiple realms of existence: mundane and celestial, living and dead, conscious and unconscious, chaotic and harmonious, masculine and feminine, and personal and cosmic. The bridge is said to be created by resonances shared between these realms through air, emotion, and imagination. According to the researcher and emeritus mathematics professor of the University of California, Santa Cruz, Dr. Ralph H. Abraham, Orphism survives from the time of Christ onward in the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. But in ancient Greece, that was just a small component of this whole religion of Orphism, which had its roots in the Paleolithic past. Orphism stressed a distinct standard of ethical and moral conduct. The Orphics abstained from eating meat and wore white, symbol of purity for cultivating the divine nature of Dionysus. What is most astonishing about the esoteric philosophy is that the lines the modern West likes to draw between science, philosophy, and mysticism are often absent in Orphic tradition. Know thyself. These words were inscribed above the portal of the ancient temple of Apollo at Delphi and are probably the most widely known aphorism from the ancient world. These words have become a cornerstone of Rosicrucian philosophy. Few traditions in the history of the world have exercised greater influence in their time or inspired more intrigue throughout the ages than Delphi. Originally, the site was called Pytho, being named after Python, the great serpent which guarded it before being slain by Apollo. Python was the son of Gaia and highly revered in the goddess worship. This may be why serpents were used so prevalently at the shrines, temples, and effigies. The serpent was the symbol of rebirth and regeneration for early Gaia worshippers. The origins of the site of the Delphic oracle are shrouded in a mysterious cloud of history. The sacred women who gave the now famous prophecies were called Pythias. named for the slain protector of the oracle. According to legend, prior to historical times, a mythic Sibyl presided at Delphi. Her title, Sibyl, means prophetess or one who sees, and comes from the Greek word Sibylla, possibly from Semitic roots meaning ancient of God. The Sibyls were known throughout ancient Greece for their prophetic insights and profound knowledge. The divine source of prophecy and knowledge changed with each invasion that occurred in the area. As we peer through the veil of time, we see the struggle played out in the replacement of the original earth goddess worship. There were at least 4 phases of worship in Delphi. First, there was the worship of the Earth Mother, Gaia, followed by Themis, goddess of divine order, daughter of Gaia and Uranus. Then Phoebe, a sun goddess, and finally Apollo, the sun god and god of music, poetry, art, cures, and prophecy. The Delphic tradition, which began in the mists of time but was certainly active by the 8th century BCE, officially ended in 394 CE with Roman Emperor Theodosius's edict that prohibited the practice of ancient traditions. By the 6th century, any remaining temples were forced to close. And yet, the prestige and mystery of the Delphic oracles continue today, especially with the new discovery of converging fault lines directly under the Temple of Apollo and the gases that can be found within. This has prompted a renewed interest with expanded and updated information from many sources. During its height of popularity, the Delphic oracle was the most prestigious and authoritative oracle in the Greco-Roman world. History is written by the conquerors. Virtually all of the information we have about Delphi comes from the writings of the Greek conquerors that destroyed many of the temples and writings of preceding cultures at Delphi. The Sibyls were mythic, semi-divine women of pre-Olympian times, and the Pythian priestesses held an important role during the Apollonian and Dionysian worship. Both were the voice that spoke of the future as determined by the deities and brought wealth and power to Delphi. The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet, it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. The word mystery derives from the Greek mysterion, or secret rites, coming from the Greek muo, meaning to close, as in to close the eyes or mouth, to be silent. Mysteries does not necessarily imply that a tradition is mysterious. It implies that its members are formally initiated and remain silent about it. The following is an exploration of 4 mystery traditions derived from some of the most remarkable figures of the ancient world. These traditions have contributed to what we know today as the Rosicrucian Order. Pythagoras. One of the most influential figures in mathematics, he is best known for his appropriately named Pythagorean theorem, which states in a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the 2 right angled sides will always be the same as the square of the hypotenuse, the long side. Pythagoras was born in 572 BCE, but his first biography was not written until the 3rd century CE. Therefore, much of the life of Pythagoras is largely considered legend. His number theory was fundamental to the teaching of the Pythagorean communities. According to their ideas, number is the essence of creation, number is being, and the universe was created and ordered according to a divine ideal pattern. Because it is the basis of creation, it is also the fundamental nature of the law of correspondences. Number, creation, cosmology, and music are all related. According to the teaching, The monad or unit is the first principle of all things and is the beginning number. Former imperator of the Rosicrucian Order, Ralph M. Lewis, wrote, Pythagoras also assigned moral qualities to numbers. These meanings were not understood by the uninitiated, and taken literally or without further qualification, they often seem ludicrous. 1 was the point of beginning, the absolute. It likewise depicted the reason, the mind cause. 2 stood for opinion. 4 represented justice and stability of character. 5 represented marriage because it consisted of the unity of the odd and even numbers, 2 and 3. 5 was also held to be the key to the laws of color. 7 was said to represent opportunity, but it also symbolized Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Even more importantly, Pythagoras taught that wisdom consisted in knowing how to count to 10. He created the Holy Tetractys, made up of the first 4 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, which when added together are 10. They represent, in order, the point, the line, the plane, and the solid. This Tetractys was therefore the basis of the cosmos. What many people do not know about Pythagoras is that he was very well traveled. He journeyed extensively through Egypt, Babylonia, Crete, and likely even India, suggesting that his gathering of knowledge helped to shape his profound understanding of mystic traditions and their common secrets. It is important to note that in the Pythagorean tradition, both men and women were equally honored as potential candidates for enlightenment through the path. In a time when patriarchy dominated most social structures, it was mystery schools like these that preserved a sense of equality among the genders. Silence. One of the most difficult things to achieve in the modern world of countless distractions was an important key to the Pythagorean path and to all of mysticism. Before he would initiate a neophyte into the mysteries of his teachings, the philosopher Pythagoras would subject the candidate to various ordeals which were designed to strengthen the initiate's character and which would allow Pythagoras to judge him or her. Following 5 years of silence, if found worthy, Pythagorean postulants, men and women, were considered for instruction into the mysteries, which were presented in 3 degrees. The first was dedicated to the science of numbers, the second to the moral and political laws, and the third to esoteric doctrines. When they were finally allowed to speak again, they would do so only with circumspection and respect. They had learned inwardly through personal experience that silence is almost divine power, the mother of all virtues. The core philosophy of the Pythagorean school was that through the study of the laws of the universe, an individual could bring his or her mind into harmony with the cosmic and become one with the universe. This belief was connected to their sacred purpose and was their primary goal in life. The Pythagorean teachings also included music and harmony. They noted the congruence between numbers and musical harmony and the universe, or to put it as Aristotle did, the whole heaven or visible universe is a musical scale or number. More importantly, these teachings incorporated the metaphysical principle that mathematical relationships express qualities or tones of energy that manifest in numbers, visual angles, shapes, and sounds, all connected within a pattern of proportion. Music was measured in number, and the cosmos was essentially comprised of music. In a theory known as the harmony of the spheres, Pythagoras proposed that the sun, moon, and planets each emit a distinct hum based on their orbital revolution, and that the quality of life on Earth reflects the tenor of celestial sounds that are physically imperceptible to the human ear. Although no original writings of Pythagoras have survived antiquity, a collection of 71 aphorisms is mentioned by Hierocles of Alexandria in the 5th century CE called the Golden Verses. From internal evidence, some scholars believe they come from a poem by Pythagoras, which was passed down orally until persecution scattered the Pythagoreans, at which point they were committed to writing. Considered a guide for right living, this early code of ethics is still practiced today. This mystical understanding of the universe has outlived the actual school and influences much of Western thought in one form or another. Rosicrucian philosophy embodies many of these concepts. The ancient Greek myth of Demeter and Persephone is well known among scholars and avid lovers of mythology, but few are aware of the ancient mystic traditions that were derived from stories of the pantheon deities. The most famous of all ancient religious mysteries, among which were those of Samothrace, the Dionysian, and the Orphic mysteries, those concerning Cybele and Adonis, and the mysteries surrounding the Delphic oracle, were those which took place at Eleusis in Attica, Greece, in honor of Demeter, goddess of agriculture. The Eleusinian mysteries stood far above the rest in spiritual content, ceremonial majesty, and cultural significance. The story deals with Persephone, the embodiment of youth and beauty, being dragged to the underworld. Tormented with grief, her mother, Demeter, goddess of agriculture, scoured the land and, unsuccessful, eventually hid in Eleusis. It was there that the goddess requested the construction of a temple and offered to teach her mysteries. She soon declared that no earthly crop would grow until Persephone was returned. Zeus intervened and had her returned to her mother, but by consuming pomegranate seeds given to her by Hades, god of the underworld, she was forced to return for 3 months every year. Thus was born the origin of winter, a time of Demeter's great sorrow. Their story symbolizes the human soul's return after the death of the body to its original and loving source. The Homeric hymn to Demeter ends with these important words: "Blessed are the mortals, inhabitants of earth, who have seen the great spectacles. But whoever remains uninitiated and never participates in the performance of the sacred ceremonies will be forever deprived of this blessing, because they will not possess it even when death shall send them to their gloomy world below." Eleusinian initiations were presented in 2 stages, the lesser mysteries held in the spring and the greater mysteries lasting 9 days in the fall. The result of these 2 was the state of apopteia, meaning having seen. These mysteries were so important that during antiquity, the whole Greek world held a truce to permit travel to and from Eleusis, 12 miles from Athens. The progressive concept of initiation and its effect on the individual continues in Rosicrucian initiations today. To understand the modern world and our place in the cosmos, it is necessary to understand the mysteries within the context of primordial tradition. Perhaps no ancient god or goddess has ever been the subject of the worship and celebration of so many throughout the ancient world, from the earliest times to the introduction of Christianity, as was Isis. But who was Isis? Isis, the devoted wife of Osiris and loving mother of Horus, the savior goddess, the queen of heaven. The image of the veil of Isis has persisted through the centuries from ancient Egyptian Sais, where Athena and Isis were identified as one to the present day. Originally a symbol of wisdom, initiation, and the mysteries, her veil has successfully become an image of protection, of the secrets of nature, of hidden history and truths to be revealed. In each historical context, the veil is an invitation to delve further into the truths which have been hidden in plain sight from the eyes of those who will not see. This is thought to be the origin of the phrase removing or lifting the veil, to symbolize the transition to enlightenment. One claim to fame of Sais, Egypt was the nearby grave of Osiris, and the Osirian mysteries were carried out on an adjacent island in the delta. It was natural, therefore, for Isis and Neith, both very ancient goddesses, to be associated with one another. Thus, the triple goddess Neith, Isis, Athena was worshipped at the goddess's shrine at Sais, a combination of very ancient feminine divinities. Further, Greek visitors to Sais, such as Herodotus, Plato, and Diodorus Siculus, also identified this Neith Isis with Athena, holding that Athena built Sais before she founded Athens, and that when Athens and Atlantis were destroyed by the Great Flood, Sais survived. To participate in a mystery religion implies a binding obligation, a duty, and an honor. Duty and honor were paramount in Roman civilization, although adherence to any religion was not necessary. Mithraism was neither static nor homogeneous. As much as Christianity varied from one region of the Roman Empire to the other and beyond, so did Mithraism. The name Mithras most likely derives from the Indo-Iranian noun mithra, meaning that which binds, as in a covenant. The celebrations of the Mithraic Mysteries were held in Mithraic temples found throughout the Roman Empire at military outposts throughout ancient Europe. The actual origins, rites, and rituals of the Mithraic Mysteries are relatively unknown, but they included a series of 7 initiations in which the candidates underwent various trials. It has been suggested that the Mithraic initiations involved 3 ordeals to be endured: heat, cold, and hunger. The temples, usually erected within caves, were built to represent the cosmos. The Mithraea, or temples themselves, were often constructed at military sites. Because the religion was based on the ideology of power and hierarchy, and was largely limited to males, the tradition was popular among Roman soldiers. But as with many of the mystery schools, by 395, when the Roman Emperor Theodosius banned all pagan religions, Christianity assimilated and replaced training in the Mithraic Mysteries, and to this day, very little is known about the true nature of the symbols presented in the initiation process. What is known is that a strict combination of scientific study, symbolic initiation, and cosmic union has been passed down and is a feature of the Rosicrucian initiation process. The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. One of the most influential and pervasive mystical traditions, the Hermetic Path, is founded on the essential unity of all things, as above, so below. This phrase emphasizes the connection between the divine and the earthly and points to the way of a return to the source. Its practitioners strive for the practical means to achieve reunion with the source of all being. Thus, Rosicrucianism is in a sense the heir to Hermetic tradition. The ancient Egyptian figure known as Thoth has been described as the god of magic, inventor of writing, sustainer of the world, and was later associated with the Logos and with Plato's mind of divinity. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, there began a fusion of Hellenistic and Egyptian traditions, which not only produced a rich and creative culture, it also allowed the wisdom of ancient Egypt to be transmitted throughout the Western world. In this process, Thoth became assimilated to the Greek Hermes. By the 2nd century BCE, many of Thoth's epitaphs were attributed to Hermes. The title Trismegistus, that is, thrice greatest, emerged. When paired with Hermes' name, it clearly stemmed from Egyptian references to Thoth. At this time, an abundance of literature attributed to Hermes Trismegistus circulated around the ancient Mediterranean. Philosophical and mystical treatises, as well as a collection of technical writings on diverse topics including magic, alchemy, and astronomy comprise these works. In ancient Egypt, each temple had a mystery school attached to it known as the House of Life. Here, the ancient mysteries were transmitted to initiates. During the 18th dynasty under Thutmose III, all of these houses of life were united into one order, and the seeds of the modern Rosicrucian Order Amorc emerged. As Hellenistic civilization blended with Egyptian life during the Ptolemaic dynasty after Alexander the Great, the teachings of the houses of life eventually evolved into the Hellenistic Corpus Hermeticum, a collection of philosophical writings and the practical Hermetica. It is this ancient knowledge, credited to Hermes Trismegistus, that has survived through the ages and is said to have influenced many of the major religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Among the most interesting modes of transmission were the Sabians of Haran, on the border of modern-day Turkey and Syria, practicing Neo-Pythagoreanism, Neoplatonism, and alchemy. They adopted the Hermetic Corpus Hermeticum as their scriptures, and within Islam successfully identified Hermes Trismegistus with the Quran's Idris, Enoch. Being the home to translators of Greek mathematics and astronomy, these, along with Pythagoreanism and Hermetism, were effectively transmitted to the Muslim world. It may have been from the Sabians that a copy of the Corpus Hermeticum made its way to Constantinople, and from there Florence, after the 15th century fall of Constantinople.
Hermetism is the term we usually use for the study of the Hermetic materials such as the Corpus Hermeticum and the Practical Hermetica in the ancient world, up until the Italian Renaissance. At the time of the Italian Renaissance, when many of these materials were rediscovered because of the fall of Constantinople and bringing these materials back over to the West, the term that is usually used is Hermeticism. So Hermeticism is really the study and practice of the Hermetic tradition from the Italian Renaissance to the present.
In Egyptian myth, Thoth is described as the spirit and intelligence of the Creator, god of learning and of healing, judge of celestial disputes, and secretary of the deities who weighed the souls of the dead. It was he who uttered the words that reunited the severed members of Osiris after the latter's murder by Set.
The Egyptian god Thoth, who is the god of magic and the arts, letters, learning, great teacher of humanity, has many counterparts. The most common in the ancient world among the deities were Hermes from Greece, Mercury from Rome, and Odin from the northern lands. In addition to that, there were counterparts throughout the world as a culture hero, that is to say, one of the great teachers of humanity. Others include Krishna, Vishnu, and Manu in India, and then of course Zoroaster in Persia. These are examples of those who educated humanity in the beginning. Now, a side note is that it's very interesting that the planet Mercury is associated with Wednesday in a great number of cultures around the world. So there does seem to be some sort of ancient link to this person who is an educator of humanity.
As we have seen, Hermes Trismegistus had his own body of scripture called the Corpus Hermeticum, as well as the Practical Hermetica, collections of writings centered on the themes of self-revelation, the oneness of the cosmos, the direct knowledge of the divine, alchemy, and many other subjects. Hermes Trismegistus, though, is not exactly a deity, but more of a superhuman benefactor of the human species. Like the bearded demigods of Mesoamerica or the legendary emperors who began the Chinese chronicles, he is at one teacher, ruler, and sage who brought science and art to humankind in its infancy. Hermes, in his many manifestations, is well known for leaving distinguished pupils. His line is said to include Orpheus, Pythagoras, Plato, Apollonius of Tyana, and Plotinus. In order to understand the often enigmatic language passed down, it is important to understand that the Hermetic art speaks of two fundamental principles, Sol and Luna. The qualities applied to them are numerous and often confusing. Sol is sun, gold, heaven, and light. Luna is moon, silver, water, stone, ocean, night, and many more. It is far from clear at first what these terms mean, but it is said that one must understand these principles within oneself in order to harness the greater power of this wisdom. To simplify further, We could say that Sol, the sun, gold, represents the principle of consciousness, that which experiences the I. Luna, on the other hand, is a name for that which is experienced. The Greek word hyle is usually translated as matter, but it seems more to resemble Eliphas Levi's astral light, a watery astral substance that has no shape of its own but can take on the shapes of specific things. Hermeticism, in one of its many dimensions, could have to do with transmuting the lead of ordinary experience into the gold of consciousness. Alchemists say you have to have gold in order to make gold. This would mean that you have to start with the raw material of your own experience, lead, using what consciousness you already have, gold, to create more consciousness.
The secret Sermon on the Mount is one of the tractates of the Corpus Hermeticum, and in it, Hermes is discussing with his son Tot the nature of transmutation and transformation. And one of the key elements of this tractate, and in fact all of the Corpus Hermeticum, is the superiority of mind and the ability of mind to actually bring forth manifestation in matter.
In an excerpt from the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermes states, "Your will flows from you and everything returns to you. Receive from all their rational offering. Preserve the all that is within us. O life, preserve it. O light, illuminate it. O divinity, place the spirit within. It is your mind that plays the shepherd to your word. O creator, bestower of the spirit upon all." The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 by the Turks caused an exodus of Greco-Roman culture. In particular, the works of Plato, Hermes Trismegistus, and others, who had only been known in Western Europe from various extracts, to resurface in Italy. Cosimo de' Medici, the ruler of Florence, was aware of the importance of these ancient texts, so he created the Platonic Academy of Florence and funded the translation of many ancient Greek texts, including the long-lost Corpus Hermeticum. It was at this time, during the Italian Renaissance, that the foundation of Western esotericism, including alchemy, astrology, magic, Kabbalah, science of numbers, and divination, was established. Not long after, beginning in 1614, the Rosicrucian manifestos were published, and there was a clear refoundation of Western esotericism that would carry on until today, passing on the ancient symbols, rituals, and practices one must undergo in order to attain oneness with the universe. As above, so below. Although we do not have an original of this most famous Hermetic statement on alchemy, the Latin headlines on one of the most famous plates of the secret symbols of the Rosicrucians reads, "The Emerald Tablet of Hermes." The words of the Secrets of Hermes, while inscribed around the emblem itself, is the well-known alchemical phrase vitriol, meaning visit the interior of earth, and by rectifying you will find the hidden stone. The Philosopher's Stone is said to hold the key to transmutation from lead into gold, but the wise initiate understands that this is a transmutation of mind, body, and consciousness, meant to impart the sacred wisdom of the living Creator. The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. Gnosticism is another important tradition contributing to what would centuries later become Rosicrucianism. The various groups that we call Gnostics today emphasize the individual coming to personal and interior experiential knowledge, gnosis, of the transcendent divine one, which is our ultimate source and goal. In truth, the many forms of Gnosticism that manifested first among various Christian groups in the first few centuries of our era were characterized by the interior quest for divine knowledge. It was a term used to describe many early groups of Christian mystics, many of whom had adopted lifestyles seeking inner truth. The word gnosis is usually translated from the Greek as experiential knowledge, as opposed to simple factual knowledge. At the core of this tradition was the idea of connecting with the divine directly, without the need for priests, rabbis, or any other religious intermediary. The idea of connecting with knowledge without any need for a gatekeeper to the divine is a familiar theme found in other mystery schools, which manifest in Rosicrucian studies and practice. The Gnostic Revealer discloses knowledge that frees and awakens people and that helps them recall who they are. When enlightened, Gnostics can live a life appropriate for those who know themselves and God, the divine. They can return back to the beginning when they were one with God, the divine. Such a life transcends what is mundane and mortal in this world and experiences the bliss of oneness with the divine. From its origins in Persia, the Near East, and Egypt, due to almost continuous persecutions, the Gnostic path moved from what is now Bulgaria to the Caucasus Mountains from the 7th through 10th centuries, then across northern Italy into the Languedoc area of southern France, around Toulouse, Foix, Carcassonne in the 12th to 14th centuries. It is from the Cathars, from the Greek katharos or pure, that the Rosicrucian tradition of today finds its closest link to Gnosticism.
These mystics allowed equality for women and men and encouraged understanding and dialogue between all faiths. They also provided excellent education for their members. All these values are highly cherished by modern Rosicrucians.
These mystics allowed equal rights for women and men, encouraged understanding and dialogue between all faiths, and provided excellent education for their members, all values that are to this day highly cherished by Rosicrucians. Gnostics sought wisdom and knowledge from varied sources. Marvin Meyer, PhD, another one of the world's leading scholars on Gnosticism, noted that, in addition to Jewish sacred literature, Christian documents, and Greco-Roman religious and philosophical texts, Gnostics studied religious works from the Egyptians, Mesopotamians, Zoroastrians, Muslims, and Buddhists. All such sacred texts disclose truths, and all were to be celebrated for this wisdom. According to the Rosicrucian text, the Positio Fraternitatis Rosicrucis, we believe that the desire to know the divine laws, that is natural, universal, and spiritual laws, will eventually supplant the need just to believe in God or the divine. We assume, therefore, that belief will one day give way to knowledge.
Plato's influence on Western culture far exceeds that than any other philosopher in history.
But Neoplatonism is a relatively modern term that mid-19th century scholars created to distinguish the ideas of later Greek and Roman Platonists from those of Plato himself. Neoplatonists merged the approaches of Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and others, addressing the individual yearning for salvation from a philosophical viewpoint. Neoplatonism posits a single source, the One, from which all existence emanates and with which an individual soul can be mystically united. The philosophical school provided ways that the individual could ascend the ladder of being through theoria, which is contemplation of the divine. Throughout history, some of the most remarkable philosophers and writers have been associated with Neoplatonic thought. Plotinus, Proclus, Augustine of Hippo, Paracelsus, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and Ralph Waldo Emerson were just a few of these. Many philosophers refer to mysticism as being either a religious tendency and desire of the human soul towards an intimate union with the divinity, or as a system growing out of such a tendency and desire. While it is clear that mysticism implies a relationship to mystery, It is widely accepted that mystical contemplation and spiritual expression can take place both inside and outside the realm of religious belief and religious dogma. Western religious mystics are very careful in the way they express their experience of the union with the ultimate source of reality because of popular misunderstanding of some forms of Western Christian theology, which insists that human beings never literally become God or the divine, although it is actually a part of Western Christian tradition that humans become partakers of the divine life. On the other hand, Eastern Christian and mystics of other traditions often describe the ultimate state of their spiritual experience as involving complete physical and sensory union with what we might call cosmic consciousness, or as they would put it, the divine. This is known as theosis, or divinization, in Eastern Christian thought. Mystical experiences are shaped by the context of beliefs within culture and tradition. All mystical experiences, therefore, vary somewhat.
Mysticism itself is the search for inner truth, for a realization of God within your being. Mysticism says it's a personal search.
Each is unique, but the uniqueness does not diminish or negate the claim for transcendence or touching ultimate reality, despite the fact that the mystical experience itself is in part a function of what the mystic understands can happen. While some exoteric religions seem to keep their direct connection firmly in the hands of a priesthood or appointed leadership, it should not be surprising that nonetheless, mysticism arises in almost all world religious traditions. The divine is also commonly called the One, which in essence lives in all things. This means that the deepest self of an individual is identical with the absolute, the infinite, unchanging, and all-powerful universal constant, God. As Rosicrucians, we recognize that the final goal of all mystical experience is connection with that divine infinity which lies beyond matter and mind, but which can transform them. The approach to this ultimate state is through the power of discriminating thought and purified emotions, and, as Henry Moore, one of the Cambridge Platonists, stressed, God reserves his choicest secrets for the purest minds. The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. There are strong connections with Kabbalah in Rosicrucianism and Martinism, and Kabbalah remains an important aspect of the teachings of the traditional Martinus Order. Kabbalah can be difficult and confusing. Different books say different things. Any two books on Kabbalah may address completely different topics, or they may provide conflicting definitions and interpretations of the same material. In addition, authors use different English spellings for the same Hebrew terms. So what is Kabbalah?
There are several different traditions that refer to themselves as Kabbalah, and within each of this there are different practices and techniques. First, the term Kabbalah refers to the esoteric or mystical aspect of Judaism. During the European Renaissance, concepts and methods from Jewish Kabbalah were adopted by some Christian scholars and integrated into their Christian theology, giving rise to what is called Christian Kabbalah. Since then, there have arisen paths that are associated with Hermetic Kabbalah and New Age Kabbalah, which is more a way of applying and understanding Kabbalah in a non-religious context today.
Within each of the various traditions, there are several types of activities. For example, Theoretical or Theosophical Kabbalah includes a system of metaphysics and methods of deriving esoteric interpretations of the Holy Scriptures. Kabbalists also use a variety of meditative techniques aimed at attaining higher states of consciousness, exploring the spiritual realm, encountering the divine, and receiving new spiritual insights. This is referred to by terms like meditative Kabbalah, prophetic Kabbalah, or mystical Kabbalah. The term practical Kabbalah refers to theurgy and magic, attempting to influence the divine realm and produce practical effects in the material world. The Sefer Yetzirah, also known as the Book of Formation, is often considered the oldest Kabbalistic text, whose first date of appearance is unknown and whose oral teachings may date from before the 1st century of the Common Era. It described in detail how God used the letters of the Hebrew alphabet to create everything in the universe. When properly interpreted, it can also be read as a meditation manual that describes a number of meditation techniques using the Hebrew letters. So ancient is this book that its origins are no longer accessible to historians. Traditionally attributed to the biblical patriarch Abraham, some scholars date it to around the 2nd or 3rd century of the Common Era. There is some evidence that these exercises were meant to strengthen the initiate's concentration and were particularly helpful in the development of telekinetic and telepathic powers. It was with these powers that one would then be able to perform feats that outwardly appeared to be magical. This is supported by the Talmudic references, which appear to compare the use of the Sefer Yetzirah to a kind of white magic. The legend of the lost word, the idea that there is a key to creation from which all reality sprang forth, is an idea that is at least several thousand years old. The first reference to a teleological or mental cause of creation and the relating of it to the spoken word goes back to the Memphite theology of Egypt, memorialized in stone around the 8th century before the Common Era, and whose origin is much older, perhaps even in the Old Kingdom, although other scholars suggest a New Kingdom origin. The chief Memphite deity was Ptah. At first, the priests of the Memphite mystery school proclaimed that Ptah was the patron god of the artisans and craftspeople of Egypt, but centuries later, these priests developed a more profound metaphysical conception with respect to Ptah. He became the grandest artisan, the creator of the universe, who did so with nothing more than thought becoming word and manifesting as physical reality. We find a similar idea in the Christian notion that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Is it possible that this New Testament idea was inherited from the much older view of Ptah the creator? Many occultists living in Paris in the late 19th century were members of the Theosophical Society. However, some of them increasingly felt disenfranchised by its excessively Eastern teachings. Among them were Gerard Oncos, better known as Papus. As a student of medicine, he had the opportunity to work with Dr. Jules Louis, who had done some research in hypnosis in Paris. It was there that he met Augustin Chaboseau, with whom he quickly established the Martinus Order, since both were part of the initiatic chain going back to the unknown philosopher Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. The Martinus Order was founded to perpetuate his teachings. The ancient order of the Rose Croix in Toulouse, being on the point of going dormant, made the decision to restore it by consolidating it on a new foundation. To perpetuate the Rosicrucian tradition as well and to connect it with Martinism, Papus, Josephin Peledon, and others formed the Kabbalistic Order of the Rose Croix, a fraternal organization which would be open to Martinus, who had completed the initiatory path. Sar Peledon was connected with the Rosicrucians of Toulouse, the Rosicrucians who would later initiate H. Spencer Lewis into the order in 1909. This Parisian order was directed by a Supreme Council of 12 members, of whom 6 remained unknown, their role consisting of rebuilding the organization if it were to be dissolved for any reason whatsoever. As with many mystery school traditions, the order itself was structured around a hierarchy of 3 degrees that could only be acquired by examination. a Bachelor of Kabbalah, Master of Kabbalah, Doctor of Kabbalah. Entry into the order was reserved only to Martinists that had achieved the SI degree. As word spread of the order, it was not long before other occultists approached them to join. But two separate factions were created in 1891, when the preference for organizational structure became a point of contention. The organizer Pappus and the artist Peladon eventually went their separate ways. Pappus wrote that the Kabbalah was divided into two parts, the theoretical and the practical, covering such topics as traditions on the sacred mystery of God and the divine, spiritual creation and the fall of the angels, the origin of chaos, matter in the 6 days of creation, and the creation of the visible humanity, our fall, and the divine ways leading to our reinstatement. Therefore, the traditional Martinus Order still studies these topics, as well as following the practical way of the heart of Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin. As Dr. Daniel Matt, a leading student of Kabbalah, writes in the Rosicrucian Digest, "We humans like to think of ourselves as the pinnacle of creation, and it is true that we are the most complicated things in the known universe. While the Big Bang is the most widely accepted theory, science has no consensus on the ultimate origin. Some theories espouse a well-defined beginning. Others, like Stephen Hawking, do not. But both suggest a radically new reading of Genesis. If God spoke the world into being, the divine language is energy, the alphabet, elementary particles, God's grammar, the laws of nature. Many scientists have sensed a spiritual dimension in the search for these laws. For Einstein, discerning the laws of nature was a way to discover how God thinks. But does the universe have a purpose? Is there meaning to our existence? Why choose to live ethically? One theory for creation, known as eternal inflation, was developed by Andre Lind. The word Kabbalah means received or received tradition. This idea portrays a universe that, by continually reproducing itself, attains immortality. Our universe is just one of countless baby universes, one of countless inflating, self-reproducing balls or bubbles, each with differing conditions and laws of nature. In modern times, being religious means, in the words of a contemporary physicist, to have an intuitive feeling of the unity of the cosmos. This oneness is grounded in scientific fact. We are made of the same stuff as all of creation. Everything that is, was, or will be started off as one infinitesimal point of energy, the cosmic seed. As we can see from these reflections, like the physicist, the mystic too is fascinated by the intimate relation of matter and energy. The key idea to retain from these teachings is that ultimately, the world is not separate from God or the divine, because this divine oneness energy is hidden within all forms of being. If it were not concealed, there could not be individual existence. Everything would dissolve back into oneness or nothingness. So, it is clear that the divine is not a separate being somewhere in another plane of existence outside of space and time. The divine is actually here in all things. And the key realization many work toward is the understanding and practical application of the idea that because the divine is in everything, we can serve the divine through everything we do. To be holy is to do what must be done next. The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. In legend, it is said that Hermes Trismegistus, to whom the Emerald Tablet is attributed, instituted alchemy so as to manifest on earth the power and wisdom of the deities. The goal of any true alchemist is to transmute that which is base into that which is pure, and this is often interpreted in terms of metals. Dr. Dennis William Houck tells us that the legendary artifact known as the Philosopher's Stone has been widely regarded as the secret key to successfully transmuting any metal into gold. Beyond that, it was a universal solvent that could dissolve any substance that was immersed in it and extract its active essence.
The Philosopher's Stone is kind of this magical ingredient that could instantly transmute matter into higher materials, higher metals. And then there are the philosophers of nature who thought of the Philosopher's Stone more as a state of consciousness, if you will. And that included all kinds of great alchemists. And the Philosopher's Stone really is connected to consciousness, but it was a huge secret in alchemy. Recently, I've gotten a hold of Newton's private journals at the University of Cambridge, which they kept secret for a long time. His writing about the Philosopher's Stone had a lot to do with his states of consciousness and perception.
The stone was also a critical ingredient used to prepare the Grand Elixir and Aurum Portable, or drinkable gold, which could regenerate the human body. In addition, it was used to restore a plant or animal from its ashes in a process called palingenesis, retrieval of the soul. Because the Philosopher's Stone carried the purified life force, it could also be used to create artificial living beings called homunculi. However, it is important to remember that the stone was not just a philosophical possibility or symbol to alchemists. Both Eastern and Western alchemists believed it was a tangible physical object they could create in their laboratories. The idea probably originated with the observation that some precious metals could be obtained from the ores of base metals. For instance, silver is often obtained from galena, the ore of lead. Also, the preparation of metal alloys and chemicals that imparted the characteristics of gold to other metals suggested there might be a single agent that would perfect any metal. The very concept of the Philosopher's Stone was also inspired by the transmutation of the elements, as their states could change from solid water, like ice, into air as steam. In this school of thought, there was a fifth element called the Quintessence. The Quintessence was thought to be the substance of heavenly bodies and the source of the other elements. Much has been written about the Philosopher's Stone, and there are scores of recipes for its preparation. Interestingly enough, we do know many details about the Philosopher's Stone and what it looked like. It was dark red in color and resembled a common irregular stone or glass crystal. The blood red color of the stone was its chief physical characteristic and showed up in many alchemical drawings as the Rose Cross, the Red King, and the Red Dragon. Rosicrucians often practiced transforming themselves and their surroundings by raising the vibratory levels. They used the intonation of certain vowel sounds for this purpose. Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, or Paracelsus, was born in 1493. In a time when exploration was branching into new frontiers, he grew up in a home with his physician father, a man well versed in philosophy with an inclination toward an inquiry into knowledge. It was customary for young men who sought higher education to travel extensively. It was thought essential to their acquisition of important knowledge. These journeys took the students to various universities throughout Europe, but his took a more extensive worldview than many of his predecessors. Paracelsus is considered one of the most important figures in the history of alchemy. But who was he really, and why is he so important? Like many great thinkers throughout history, he rejected the traditional dogmatic methods of the scholastic system. He found his passion exchanging ideas with renowned alchemists of the time, whose studies were profoundly inspired by their experiments. He soon embarked on a quest and traveled the world, to Africa and to the boundaries of Arabia first. He was determined that further observation through intimate association was the only way to understand the underlying causes of disease. He believed it necessary to be close to people and to nature. He believed that they constitute the greatest laboratory available for research. In Spain, Paracelsus's knowledge for Hermetic philosophy allowed him to consult eminent Moorish occultists, and it was here that we believe the biggest impact on his esoteric writings took place. His interest in the profound mysteries of human existence, which go beyond the care of his body, was thus heightened. Eventually, his travels took him to Russia. There, he was thoroughly impressed with a visit to Mongolian tribes. He noticed the powerful effects that faith and imagination had upon their healing of the sick. Thereupon, he wrote an extensive exposition of the subject, which constitutes an early treatise on hypnotism and psychosomatic medicine. During his peregrinations, he was plagued with lice and devised a successful formula for a powder to combat them. It was the first medicine of its kind. His knowledge of alchemy was so thorough that it gave him an advantageous insight into the chemical properties and their effects on the human organism. He wrote many of his formulas in the alchemical symbols commonly employed by the Rosicrucians of later years. This aroused jealousy in his profession, the members of which exercised strong political influence. In 1525, by their connivance, he was arrested in Salzburg and accused of giving support to rebellious peasants. No evidence was forthcoming, and so the charges were dismissed, but he was forced to leave the city. Yet, the stories of Paracelsus's fame continued to spread throughout Europe. In one case, he visited the home of a girl paralyzed since childhood. After a thorough examination of his young patient, he prescribed a medicine that he had dubbed Red Lion, which was also an alchemical symbol. To the amazement of those around, the girl, after a few applications, was able to walk again. Events like this added to the growing acclaim of his powers, and his writings had now become extensive. Though he became well known for his ability to cure untreatable illnesses, more importantly, he is known as a revolutionary who exposed profit sharing between physicians and apothecaries. His ethics and abilities were the target of jealousy, and eventually he was forced to flee for his life. One of his most notable accomplishments was helping to bring a plague to a halt in 1534 in Sturtzing in northern Italy. But after spending months treating the sick, he was outcast and shunned because of his skills, and some even feared he tapped into some malevolent power. Though he made a massive impact on the interpretation of medicine as a healing art, it was not until recently that scholars have acknowledged him as a truly revolutionary alchemist. He emphasized experimentation in his work rather than relying on ancient medical texts for authority. Carl Jung understood alchemy to represent the process of self-realization and individuation. It should be noted that two distinct, yet related, schools of thought emerged from the interpretation of alchemy. There is physical alchemy, in the case of putting metals and other substances through the physical process of transformation, and there is spiritual alchemy, which is essentially personal transformation of consciousness. Both concepts are important in understanding the later influence on the Rosicrucian curriculum. One cannot discuss alchemy without acknowledging the importance of one of the most recognized alchemical symbols, Emblem 21, from Michael Myers' Atalanta Fugiens. Make a round circle of the man and woman, and draw out of it a quadrangle, and out of the quadrangle a triangle. Make a round circle, and thou shalt have the stone of the philosophers. The illustration is an example of one way to interpret alchemy. According to the 17th century Rosicrucian alchemist Michael Meyer, alchemy can be seen in two ways. First, as a way of grouping together potent symbols that students may use as a focal point for meditative journeys. Second, it can be interpreted as an early translation of mysticism in the form of words, symbols, and pictures.
The response of alchemists to the Rosicrucian movement, which emphasized using techniques for elevating consciousness, kind of emerged during that time that was really fruitful. It gave alchemy the idea that psychological operations could be performed too, that the same operations they used in the laboratory could be applied to psychology, could be applied to health, could be applied because they were universal principles. So you find the birth of psychology during that time, you find the birth of a science of consciousness at that time, the birth of physics, and the birth of chemistry. It was really a powerful time in history.
It is fascinating to realize that the alchemists of the late Middle Ages understood the necessity for humans to reconcile the two aspects, male and female, contained in every individual. People who acknowledge that their personality is composed of attributes that can be seen as either feminine or masculine and come to accept these characteristics are made more whole and balanced in their personality. Another important symbol is the rose and the cross, illustrated by the 16th century holistic healer and practitioner of medicine in the tradition of Paracelsus, Rosicrucian Robert Fludd. His rose and cross first appeared as an illustration in the fourth part of the Summum Bonum, published in 1629 in defense of the Rosicrucian fraternity. The Latin inscription means, "The rose gives honey to the bees." When one examines the components of the image, it is filled with symbolism and imagery that bring deeper meaning to the illustration and contemplation and can inspire insights. If there is one essential practice for all mystics and for Rosicrucians in particular, it is spiritual alchemy. This form of alchemy amounts to one of the foundations of philosophy and sets out the path we must follow in order to fulfill our inner evolution. This is precisely the great work that each human being must commit to accomplish in order to discover the philosopher's stone that dwells in the deepest part of themselves. We are set forth on a path with the choice to reveal the perfection of our own nature. The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. Grasping the essence of Rosicrucianism begins in understanding that the inner path to enlightenment serves as a guide for any initiate. The Western esoteric traditions have their roots in the ancient mystery schools of ancient Egypt, which were unified under Thutmose III and Hatshepsut. Spiritual practitioners, healers, alchemists, and teachers ranging from Greek philosophers to Renaissance scholars have preserved some of the values in esoteric traditions that emerged as the modern Rosicrucians in the 1600s. Though the knowledge of these traditions is ancient, the Rosicrucians re-emerged in Europe with the publication of 3 manifestos. Europe in the early 1600s was still embroiled in the strife engendered by its moral crisis. The Inquisition was in full force, where heretics burned at the stake, while in France the wars of religion between Protestant and Catholic Christians had raged from 1562 to 1594. King Henry IV, who had been seen as one who could end this strife, was assassinated in 1610. The population had been enduring drought and famine for many years. The first manifesto, the Fama Fraternitatis, was anonymously published in 1614 at the print shop of Wilhelm Wessel in Kassel, Germany. It explained the necessity for general reformation of the world and was essentially an anonymous call to the leaders and scholars of Europe at the time to help transform society beyond religious intolerance and superstition. In 1615, the year following, Wilhelm Wessel published a second manifesto in Kassel, Germany, the Confessio Fraternitatis. The author of this text also remained anonymous. In the introduction, he points out that this work involves a philosophical treatise, after noting that it is embellished by the actions, studies, and knowledge of the RC fraternity. A short preface follows, signed Frater RC, wherein the author indicates that this brief consideration was derived entirely from Hermes, Plato, Seneca, and other philosophers. This confession of the laudable fraternity of the most honorable order of the Rosy Cross, written to the learned of Europe, was divided into 14 sections, although later editions did not always observe this division. In this text, the Rosicrucians place emphasis on their possession of the key to all knowledge, whether it be the arts, philosophy, theology, or medicine. Most experts agree that these two manifestos were not the work of one person, but rather a small group of 30 students and scholars at the University of Tübingen in Germany who were passionate about alchemy, Kabbalah, astrology, and Christian mysticism. Both texts were followed by a third in 1616, entitled The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. Though it was published anonymously as well, this text is believed to have been authored by Johann Valentin Andrea, also associated with Tübingen, as an initiatic narrative for a person's quest toward the sacred marriage with the soul. These allegorical texts were also meant to teach examples of a deeper understanding of the connection between daily life and the divine nature of reality. In 1927, Amorc first published a booklet entitled The Light of Egypt, The Strange Story of the Rosicrucians, under one of H. Spencer Lewis's pseudonyms, Sri Ramathuriyo. After exploring the publication of the Rosicrucian manifestos in the early 1600s and their impact on the Western world, in this work, a fictional Dr. Roberts explains the importance of applying the knowledge that the Rosicrucians perpetuate and reveals the history of the first Rosicrucians in America. In 2001, a fourth Rosicrucian manifesto, the first in almost 400 years, was published, called the Positio Fraternitatis Rosae Crucis. This manifesto is a position statement of how Rosicrucians saw the world at that time and presented many of the challenges related to the environment and materialism and excessive consumerism. One of the more important ideas to note is that although the situation was seen as troublesome and worth concern, it was not deemed hopeless. It serves primarily as a call for each individual to focus on what society could be. At that time, members in North America were scheduled to be mailed a manifesto in September, immediately after the World Convention in Sweden. When the September 2001 attacks occurred in the United States, the process was delayed and mail services were suspended because of an anthrax scare. Members all received the manifesto as part of the first delivery of mail after these events, a pointed reminder of what needed correction in our world. In January 2014, the fifth Rosicrucian manifesto was published, in part to honor the 400th anniversary of the first, the Fama Fraternitatis. This new text, called the Appellatio Fraternitatis Rosae Crucis, served as an appeal for more spirituality, humanism, and preservation of the environment. Its dual purpose was as a call to Rosicrucians, mystics, and all others who have awakened consciousness and are committed to a path toward enlightenment, and as a mystic steward of global change. Still today, the Rosicrucian Order Amorc continues to perpetuate the Rosicrucian traditions worldwide through its many grand lodges around the world. The new chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz was sealed on January 6, 2016. Inspired by the third Rosicrucian manifesto, published 400 years previously, this sixth manifesto leads us toward the vision of a better world through an alchemical dream. Together, the order strives to share the tools necessary along the path to becoming a Rose Croix.
The path of the Rose Croix is the path to enlightenment, and the end state, the end of that path, is the Rose Croix state.
Therefore, to be a Rosicrucian means to be on a path to enlightenment. To be a Rose Croix signifies having come to an end of that path. The traditional Martinus Order, which operates under the aegis of the Rosicrucian Order Amorc, is an initiatic order and school of moral chivalry based essentially on Judeo-Christian mysticism, as well as on other world spiritualities. Regardless of this fact, the order is not a religion, and members come from various religious backgrounds, belief systems, and walks of life. Martinus teachings include lessons and experiments on understanding our dreams, the relationships of numbers, attuning with celestial bodies, symbolism, and more. Its name is derived from that of Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, the French mystic and author who wrote under the pseudonym The Unknown Philosopher. It was formed into an order by the esotericists Papus, Dr. Gerard Oncos, and Augustin Chaboseau in the late 19th century, and is now conducted under the auspices of the Rosicrucian Order Amorc. What is fascinating about Saint Martin is his turn away from theurgy, the exterior way, in favor of the benefits of the interior way. He preferred a path to enter into the heart of the divine and make the divine enter into his heart.
Well, Martinism is often called the way of the heart. And one of the most profound practices that Martinists share with many other Western esoteric traditions and also many religious and spiritual traditions around the world is what is called the prayer of the heart. And this is usually done by practicing rhythmic breathing. And then accompanying that rhythmic breathing is the repetition of a mantra or a name which represents the person's deepest spirituality, their deepest mysticism. Now, it's not surprising because, of course, breath is the source of life, and the heart, as the ancient Egyptians, and in fact all peoples know, is the true center of consciousness.
The prayer of the heart is as old as humanity itself. Students visiting the Rosicrucian Egyptian Museum in San Jose often ask why the ancient Egyptians disposed of the brain but kept the heart and replaced it during the mummification process. In ancient Egypt, their physicians knew quite well the importance of the brain in this life and how it regulated many bodily functions. However, in the next life, it would not be needed, as the heart is the true center of consciousness. When we practice the prayer of the heart, we are attuning ourselves to the rhythm of creation. We are preparing for our mystical marriage with divine wisdom deep within our hearts. The Rosicrucian Path is the journey of the mystic. Few souls brave it at any single time. Yet it is this internal voyage that has rewarded many of our greatest minds with the ability to enrich the world. But it is a pilgrimage each individual must travel in their own time, for it reveals the path of knowing. It transcends time and space. This path of the Rosicrucian reveals higher truths for personal evolution. You are invited to witness its sacred history. The mystery schools were centers of study and mystic initiation in the ancient Western world, where the mysteries of the universe, of nature, and of humanity were explored. These spiritual centers educated students in natural laws and principles so they could live more harmoniously with them. Initiates were encouraged to practice introspection in order to know oneself better, and were provided with a path toward a connection with the great mystery of the universe. Today, the Rosicrucian Order Amorc perpetuates many of the traditions of these ancient mystery schools and many of the philosophies that sprang from them. In order to begin understanding the core teachings of the Rosicrucian Order, we must begin by examining the origins of the word mystery. It is derived from mysteria, which is made up of the Greek verb muo, meaning to close, as in to close the mouth in secrecy, or to close the eyes, and teria, meaning festival. According to Carl Karenyi, one of the leading experts on the Eleusinian mysteries, the word mysteria means the festival at which the secret is communicated. The Dictionary of Philosophy and Religion defines the mystery religion as the name given to a group of religious cults popular in Hellenic and Roman periods. The mystery religions were characterized by a body of esoteric knowledge and ritual that allegedly had the power to purify the initiate and guarantee union with God and personal immortality, including the Eleusinian and Orphic mysteries of ancient Greece and the Roman Mithraic mysteries. Added to this list in the Rosicrucian tradition are the Egyptian mysteries of Osiris and Isis and the mystery schools associated with Akhenaten and his great-great-grandfather Tutmosis III, as well as the Pythagorean school in Italy. The Rosicrucian teachings are the culmination of all of the mystery traditions that have been covered in this series thus far, from the ancient primordial traditions of Atlantis, through Egypt, Greece, and Italy, through the alchemists, up through the Renaissance of Hermetic and Neoplatonic thought, and even beyond to the later groups of Martinism and Rosicrucianism. In the spring of 1908, on the Thursday after Easter, while seated in a pew of his church in Manhattan to meditate, H. Spencer Lewis had a mystical experience that would affect the rest of his life.
Harvey Spencer Lewis was meditating in a church in New York as a young man, and it came to him that what he was seeking would not be found in books. And this is what began his search for the Rosicrucians.
After being called to France, he was initiated into the Rosicrucian Order in 1909 in Toulouse, and was given the mandate to restore the work of the order in America. The Rosicrucians of Toulouse also gave him the mandate to make the ancient teachings accessible to modern men and women. In 1915, the establishment of the Rosicrucian Order Amorc was a success, at which point H. Spencer Lewis was elected to take charge of the order here. Under his guidance, the Amorc would see rapid growth and expansion throughout the United States. After having had headquarters in New York, San Francisco, and Tampa, in November 1927, Amorc established its headquarters in San Jose, California. The location was significant as it was near an earlier round of Rosicrucian work in 1602 in what is now Carmel, California. This was the beginning of activities at Rosicrucian Park, whose architecture was largely inspired by ancient Egypt. Decades since that time have seen Rosicrucian Park grow to encompass most of a large city block. Today, Rosicrucian Park annually attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world and is the destination of thousands of Rosicrucian travelers worldwide who experience the Grand Temple, Egyptian Museum, Planetarium, Research Library, Peace Garden, Labyrinth, Alchemical Garden, Alchemy Exhibit, and the classes and seminars offered there. In order to establish a more direct connection with the ancient traditions of the order, Rosicrucian initiatic journeys to Egypt began in 1929 with Imperator H. Spencer Lewis leading the first group. Long before transatlantic airlines, 75 Rosicrucians from throughout the United States, Canada, Mexico, and Europe accompanied H. Spencer Lewis on that first initiatic journey. The principal destination was Egypt. However, on the way to and from that mystical land, the travelers visited mystical sites in the Madeira Islands, the Mediterranean, North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. The journey lasted 70 days and concluded on the spring equinox. As still is the case today with Rosicrucian trips, travelers were treated to unique experiences and unusual sights usually passed over by the casual tourist. At every site in every city, members learned of the cultural and mystical aspects related to the site. The most special features of this trip were the unique initiations conducted by Imperator Lewis. This tradition continues today with Imperator Christian Bernard conferring the initiatic rituals in Egypt. According to Imperator Ralph M. Lewis, The first requisite of a Rosicrucian is to have the proper attitude of mind. The Rosicrucian must accept two basic premises. First, that there is that which is to be known. Second, there is the knower. That which is to be known is all-inclusive. It is the absolute, the ultimate, the omniscient, the perfection. Therefore, that which is to be known is the plethora or the fullness of all being. Rosicrucians learn that thoughts manifest and develop ways of controlling such manifestation for the good. When H. Spencer Lewis made his transition to the next life in 1939, his son, Ralph M. Lewis, assumed the leadership of Amorg. Under his direction, the order grew exponentially. After World War II, Imperator Ralph M. Lewis continued founding lodges globally, some of which today have evolved into Grand Lodges. In keeping with the wishes of H. Spencer Lewis, he proceeded with a revision of teachings intended for the members. At the same time, he wrote a large number of articles concerning esotericism and philosophy in several noteworthy books. As Amorg favors freedom of consciousness, its teachings are not dogmatic or sectarian in character. They are proposed to members as the basis for reflection and meditation, with the aim of passing on to them a traditional knowledge that contributes to their spiritual unfoldment, as well as offering the spiritual tools that enable members to experiment to learn what is true for themselves. Thus, the ultimate goal in initiatic development is to reach the Rose-Croix state at some time in our incarnations. It is important to emphasize here that the words Rosicrucian and Rose-Croix do not have the same meaning in Amorg. In keeping with this motto, the greatest tolerance in the strictest independence, Amorg is independent of all religions and all political systems, as well as other orders except for the traditional Martinus Order. However, it is interested in the evolution of the world. According to Imperator Christian Bernard, the expression cosmic attunement, well known to members of the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians, represents the state of consciousness that all Rosicrucians must achieve permanently and definitely if they want to know forever the peace profound of the Rose-Croix. The idea of cosmic attunement is rooted in the notion of harmony as the connection uniting separate elements into a coherent, balanced, and organic whole. From a Rosicrucian standpoint, the divine, or God as one conceives God to be, is the energy that is the origin of all that is, whereas the cosmic is the energy in action. In other words, God is the creative universal force, and the cosmic is both the visible and invisible creation. This is the reason why the Kabbalah has always placed the divine beyond what it calls the three veils of negative existence, that is, outside the boundaries of human understanding. The great majority of Rosicrucians feel and understand the importance of the periods of cosmic attunement, for they are the key to Rosicrucianism and mysticism in general. In 1909, Harvey Spencer Lewis traveled to France, where he accepted from the masters of the order the charter to re-establish the Rosicrucian tradition in America in 1915. Since then, the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians, also known as the Rosicrucian Order Amorg, has served as a spiritual path to hundreds of thousands of women and men and continues to perpetuate many of the traditions of the ancient mystery schools and the important philosophies that sprang from them.